switch, but let me point out, it's not a conversation. One person speak, one listening, then we switch, feedback comes back, one person speak, one listening. And just so pointing it out. So pausing here now, so now the listener becomes the speaker. So the listener starts calling up that unpleasant event. So take a moment, remembering, describing how it felt in that moment, how the body felt, the sensations, what was going on through the body, and you know, if you don't have anything you can remember, that's fine too. I don't remember my body. But what the emotions, the feelings were, and what the thoughts were, without getting into a whole justification explanation. The listener is just listening, not talking back, not interacting, not reaching out, not hugging, not holding hands, listening. And then when we switch, the listener gives the feedback. This is what I heard, this is what I felt, this is what I saw in this experience, this is how it was for me. I was listening to you, not giving advice, okay? All right, getting ready?
This is my story.
Yeah.
So now the second person speaks, ready, go.
Okay, so about a half or two ago, my daughter called me and said that she was in a very complicated apartment in John Maryland, and this was all occurring in the midst of GD's time when she was really down and out, so I was dealing with her issues, and then all of a sudden this other condition came up for me, which had to do with my daughter, and you know, I talked with her but she and I are the best communicators with one another. She gets frustrated with my dad and starts asking me to ask her all sorts of questions. You know, pursues things more rationally, perhaps, than she's feeling things emotionally. So the connection, you know, sometimes between the two. Anyway, the long and short of it is that I became very concerned because, you know, we've been together for 9 years, our grandson, 4 weeks, our daughter, and now, you know, my life is basically going to be dramatically changed. And I started worrying about, well, you know, how she going to provide for herself and everything. She's living in this idyllic mountain community in California, but it's kind of a resort. And while Felix is in first grade, my grandson, she's now going to have to do what a lot of people do in situations like this, find a job. He's started supporting herself, but she hasn't been working all of this time. And her lifestyle is going to change dramatically. So my reaction is, okay, what can I do about this? How can I help her solve this problem? She's talking about going to a lawyer and she's really unschooled in all of these matters. So I'm worrying about her from that perspective as to whether she can be influenced or whether she can handle this emotionally and in terms of her reality. So I've gotten more engaged on a semi-limited basis, but I found out how much her partner, Karen, the father of my grandson, is going to provide for me. So I'm going out there tomorrow morning very early. I'm going to be out there for a week. And normally we're vacation. I go on vacation. But now, you know, I'm going to be immersed in this issue. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to handle it. You know, or what the right thing would be to do in terms of supporting them on one hand, and then, you know, not dealing with other issues that she's really responsibility.
All right, begin to wind down that story for you.
I haven't had to really be overly concerned about it,
And, all right, pausing right there. Pausing right there. And now the listener gets to talk. Again, the speaker doesn't say anything for a couple of minutes. The listener gets to feed back what it felt like, what I heard, what I felt, I saw. All right.
Okay, what I heard is that Emily is going to break from Gary, and when she told me this, children were very worried, concerned, and be there, she didn't like the way you're there. And that concern for her grandson for how she's going to take care of herself. Say that. Her partner, Gary, spoke to him recently and seemed like he that made you feel better, and that you're going to be there tomorrow to be there. I'll be there. But I know that you each of us should have been on the center of what we were talking about, at this stage of life, doesn't change.
All right. So thank you. And now we have 1 minute to converse. Anything you want to say back and forth, just so, in case you haven't, just to clarify anything so that there's no misthinking that, perhaps he thought the wrong thing or said the wrong thing or anything, or just to talk, just for a moment.
So what
anything you want to say or not say, you don't have to talk.
Was maybe how I thought you felt when you were telling the story. Obviously, I sensed that there was an indecision and a sense about you that your normal reaction would have been to want to say something to your daughter. Exactly. And give her the best advice that you could probably
Okay, everybody, thank you. Thank your partners, and when you can, coming back into the circle. So reforming the circle. It's going to be coming back to the circle. And if you guys over here, Susan and so I'm going to be using the chalkboard here, so if you want to come over a little bit, turn this way. But at the same time, we're still discussing. So any comments on how that was? Was it an unpleasant event for you to be doing that, or was it a pleasant event? Yeah.
It was very pleasant for me. We had a really good connection, I think. It was interesting not knowing this person really, but having so many similarities in our experience.
Thanks.
Mine was very pleasant. I had a very lovely partner who very beautifully described a very difficult situation that he was put in. And was very good in terms of describing the feelings he had, etc. And I also enjoyed being given the opportunity to tell something that frustrated me, and to kind of think in terms of how basically I thought I handled the situation well. So it was very pleasant, very pleasant. And I think we had a good, he and I chatted afterwards, of course, that 30 seconds or whatever. We had good communication, very good communication.
Thanks. You concur with him? Okay, thanks. Well, we one of the reasons why we do this is to lead into this little bit of so-called lecturing. This will be the only time I really so-called use some kind of scientific lecturing. So you may want to turn around since I'll be using this board here.
Yeah.
Remembering that this course is called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, and so the unpleasant event sort of leads into what is usually considered stressful events in our life. I mean, for the most part, stressful events are considered pleasant or unpleasant?
Unpleasant.
Unpleasant, yeah. Always? We'll see.
No.
Okay, yeah, so we'll get to that in a moment. So the unpleasant, stressful events, since you guys discussed it, let's just go through some. If this is the right one, no? So, body sensations. How does a stressful event, the unpleasant event, feel in the body? What are some of the different sensations? Calling them out one at a time so I can hear them. Anybody?
Tension. Yeah. Tension.
Tension? Any particular place?
In the muscles.
Muscles?
Shoulders.
All over? Or
Shoulders, neck.
shoulders, neck. Okay, shoulders, neck. All right, what else? Tension?
Increase in blood pressure.
Blood pressure going up. I'm going to use some medical abbreviation. BP, blood pressure. Okay.
Tightness in chest. Tightness in chest.
Tight chest. Okay. What else? Jaw. Lock jaw. Clench.
The breath gets anxious.
Breath.
Yes. Shallow.
So rapid breath. So I'm going to do rapid respiration. That's easier for me. So.
Fatigue.
Fatigue.
Fatigue in the body. Tiredness. Fatigue in the body.
Fatigue or
Fatigue.
fatigue? The body fatigue. Yeah. What else?
Sweating. Sweating.
Sweating. Okay.
Headaches.
Headaches.
Headaches. So HA means headache. It's a neurologic word. Yes. Anybody else?
Tears. 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 I don't know. Welling up.
A welling up.
Yeah.
A sense of welling up.
Yeah. Emotional. Yeah.
Well, we'll get to the emotions in a minute, but the feeling in the body is the welling up.
Right.
Yeah.
Sick stomach.
Sick stomach, nausea. Sick stomach, nausea.
Drowsiness. Drowsiness.
Drowsiness. Okay, that's a good one. It's whatever you feel, by the way. There's no right or wrong. It's just when you're stressed out, when you're feeling unpleasant, what goes on in the body. So it's a pretty complete list. You guys, this is good. Anything going on with the bowel, bladder, eyes?
Blurred vision. Blurred vision.
Blurred vision. Okay. Blurred.
Or tunnel vision.
Was that it?
Tunnel vision.
Tunnel. Okay. I think that should be enough. Let's go to. So you see all these. So let's go now to the emotions. Is that what you had said?
Yeah.
Say it out loud.
Extreme emotion.
Yeah. What's the name of some of the emotions you feel when it's unpleasant? What would you call them?
Oh, tears.
Fear?
Tears. Tears like sadness.
Sad?
Anger.
Anger,
Frustration.
frustration,
Irritability.
irritable,
Helplessness.
I'm sorry,
Helplessness. Like
Helplessness.
Helplessness. Like I mean, like,
helpless or hopeless?
oh,
Helpless?
I was gonna say, I said helpless.
You said
Both
help-
Could be written up
Oh,
there.
you'll take both?
Sure.
Helpless, hopeless. Sorry, I didn't hear it right.
Impatient.
Impatient. A whole list of them.
And some people get passive and passive aggressive.
Passive and passive. Okay, good. Yeah. Passive. Withdrawn like passive, like that thing. Aggressive. And then both, right?
Accusatory. Accusatory.
Blaming, okay.
Blaming.
Is that an emotion? Could it be an emotion? It could be. But we're now going over to the mind. So we could put blaming. Okay. Any other?
Hurt.
Hurt? Like just feeling hurt? Okay, and I'll add shaming. Blaming and shame go together for me. So. All right, in the mind. So I think the accusing may be part. So what does my mind do when it's unpleasant? I begin to accuse. What else goes on in the mind?
Get reactive. So you're reactive. You don't stop.
Reactive.
So it's like
Reactivity.
it's almost like uncontrollable. Hard to control. That you can't reflect. Take a moment to pause, reflect. You lose that.
Lose
space.
control. Is that what you're saying? Or
Yeah, you lose some control.
lose control? Lose.
LLOS.
Okay, what else? That's good.
Confusion.
Control.
Confusion.
Confusion goes on in the mind. Yeah.
Rationalization.
Analyzing, overanalyzing maybe.
Obsessing.
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 Obsessing
that's all you
over.
think of whenever-
Okay. Got it.
Rationalizing.
Rationalizing.
Racing.
Racing. That's good.
Racing.
Racing mind. Okay, racing mind.
You catastrophize. You make things worse.
Catastrophizing, yeah. You guys got it pretty well. You guys are all students in the psychology world, I see. So yeah, so this is a pretty complete list, but there's still probably more, and we don't need to go into them all. So we bring all this up just so I can bring into the discussion a little bit of the science behind the stress response. And oh, it's stressful to get this down. So in the stress response, generally speaking, we said before stress is unpleasant, but as some people pointed, started looking around, say maybe it isn't sometimes. But generally speaking, when we talk about the stress response, we're talking about the fight. And what's the other one?
Flight.
And what's the other one?
Freeze.
Who said it? Say it out loud.
Freeze.
Okay, so everybody heard that one?
No, freeze.
Fight, flight, freeze. And I'll go through them in a moment. But generally speaking, stress, the biology sort of goes with the fight or flight feeling. And we went through some of these characteristics. So you don't need to know all this. Let me preface this. Don't worry about the science and the facts. And it's evolving. So yes, some of it is very well grounded, but some of it is changing. But the fight or flight response is a survival response, right? Does everybody understand that part? It's biological, it's instinctual in that it occurs below the level of consciousness. So when we see a threat to our survival, we mobilize to go into fight or flight. And there's two mechanisms. One is through what's called it's through hormones. So I'll go through that one first. We perceive the threat So we have to say, okay, that may be a threat, that is a threat, whatever, but at least we believe it is for that moment, or we're going to assume it is. So it has to start with our perception. Remember why we did the 9 dots puzzles in the past, so to point out that perception colors our responses quite a bit, our reactivity. So we perceive a threat, but then subconsciously we trigger, there's a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, central part of the brain. Its main function, again, you don't have to know all this stuff or whatever, but just its main function, it has a lot to do with the rhythms of our daily cycle. So the sleep-wake cycle, the hormone rhythms, the temperature, body temperature cycles, even some of the monthly cycles are run through there. The hypothalamus is connected directly to what's called the pituitary gland. Does anybody know what that is, the pituitary? Mm-hmm. Pituitary gland is considered the master gland. It hangs from the brain. It's right behind the eyes. It's in a protective little shell. So it's directly connected to the brain by the hypothalamus. Master gland secretes stimulating hormones to all the other glands, your genitals, your thyroid gland, stuff like that, and also the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands are located by the kidneys. So see a threat, hypothalamus tells the pituitary, secretes something, goes right to the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland secretes 2 things, mostly 3, or a handful of things, but 2 things. One's adrenaline, and one's cortisol. So fight or flight, stress response. We see something, we think it's a threat, we get triggered, and we put this cascade into motion. And just to complete the stress response, there's another part of the brain called the amygdala. Anybody heard of the amygdala? Yeah? So the amygdala you don't need to know, but again, it's subconscious. It colors our world with importance and emotions, and it's generally in the negative side. So some people think the amygdala has something to do with the fear response and anxiety, and indeed in people with PTSD and anxiety disorders, their amygdalas are more hyperactive. But the amygdala triggers the sympathetic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system is the one below consciousness. It has 2 sides. One's the accelerator side, which is called the sympathetic side, and the other side is the parasympathetic. It's the brake. It slows things down. But when we go into flight or fight mode, we also trigger the sympathetic, the accelerator. So we go into this whole cascade where part of the nervous system goes into action and the hormonal system secretes adrenaline and cortisol. And so, anybody know what adrenaline does? Anybody? What are some of the things? It elevates the blood pressure. What else?
Increases energy. Yeah. Increases energy.
Increases the energy. What else?
Blocks pain, so you can do difficult things.
Blocks pain. What else?
Tunnel vision.
Tunnel vision. Yeah, it's cortisol too. So, and what else? Okay, you forgot. Blood pressure goes up. It shunts blood away from this area and to the arms and legs and up to the brain so that you can prepare to, as we're saying, the energizing effect is to bring the blood and attention to the arms and legs so you can run away or fight, and to the brain. So the brain has a lot's going on in here. And so what happens to the muscles? They become tense and they can become shaky. Happens to the jaw, it gets locked up. The blood pressure goes up, the heart rate goes up, the breathing goes up. Okay? So pretty much you go in here, sweating happens. The pupils actually dilate. That's different, a little different than the tunnel vision. That sense of welling up, and because it's shunting blood away from here, from the GI tract, from the gastric tract, you tend to get the nausea, the butterfly, and the stomach feeling sensations in here. So that's what adrenaline does. And does anybody know what cortisol does? Anybody have cortisone shots or cortisone? Know anybody who's had cortisone?
Numbs you. Numbs you.
It reduces pain. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How does it reduce pain? Do you happen to know? Not that you need to know this. Reduces pain by reducing inflammation. So it really is not numbing out like they say Novocaine numbs out. So it affects your inflammatory system.
T cells.
Hmm?
It affects T cells. Cortisol.
Maybe. Yeah, I forgot. I know it affects inflammation. I'll get to in a moment why it's important. It also releases blood sugar, and it changes your fat metabolism so that you have that energy. You use blood sugar in the fatty tissue and all of that. When it goes into the brain, so this is where the tunnel vision comes in, it shuts down the prefrontal areas of the brain where we use rational thinking and decision-making, planning, and impulse control. So under stress, under fight or flight, we lose that part of the brain, as well as our memory centers. Our memory centers are very sensitive to cortisol. The more cortisol you secrete, the more the memory centers, the hippocampus part of the brain starts to shrink. That's the same part that shrinks with dementia and with Alzheimer's. So the chronic stimulation of that area makes it decline even more. And it affects, so it does cause the tunnel vision. So that under stress, survival, you don't want to be sitting there over-analyzing. If there's a saber-toothed tiger coming at you, you don't want to sit there and, is that the guy I saw last week? Look at that, he looks a little different, the tooth is bigger, what's going on? You're making a split decision and getting out. Yes?
I know I must be in the wrong ballpark here, but I'm going to ask it anyway, at the risk of sounding crazy. Why wouldn't I be converting stress to a motivator and find the solution, get it done, think out of the box or whatever it takes, a motivator.
So are you asking why you don't do it or why I haven't discussed
why
it?
this isn't part of the discussion.
Yeah, I haven't gotten there yet, that's why. So thanks for bringing it up. I just want to finish it up because of what happens with all this and so leading into that, so traditionally we think of stress as a bad thing. Traditionally we believe it's bad, we talk about it, stress, everybody's stressed, I'm stressed out. The word stress, does anybody know where it came from?
Hans Selye?
Yeah, and do you remember what you know anything about how he brought it up? Or?
Not exactly, but I remember a term that he also, I think, coined called eustress, which was a positive stress.
Okay, so there you go. So it's actually neutral. So Hans Selye was a physician from Canada back in the 30s and 40s. He borrowed the term from engineering. Stress and strain, the stress that you put on a bridge or whatever and all that before it breaks kind of thing. And so he did know that there could be a potential for there's some use to so much stress before breaking point. The use stress versus what I started saying now, distress rather than stress. And then he went around the world talking about stress, and that's when people started thinking stress is bad, and then people started correlating, finding research about the cortisol and the adrenaline. So the acute stress in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. It's a survival mechanism. Without it, we probably wouldn't be here, some of us anyway. Certain things have happened in our life. If you see a car coming at you, you jump into this, jump out of the way. And all of these things, we can walk right through what they do. But the issue isn't the acute stress. It's not the use stress. It's not the usefulness stress. It's the chronic release of this stress over and over and over. Not done with an attempt to do something. And even so, because I know a handful of adrenaline junkies that keep doing risky behavior that gets worse and worse and worse over time. But what happens when you have adrenaline secreting, if not continuously, up and down, up and down, up and down over many, many months, if not years? So what happens to your heart rate? What happens to your heart? What happens to your muscles? Anybody?
Takes its toll on your body.
High blood pressure?
Absolutely.
Chronic disease.
And it's a stimulant, so you get anxiety, you get insomnia, it causes the headaches, the muscle tension goes on, the tightness in the jaw, needing the mouth guard, the irritability in the muscles, the shakiness.
Well, that's why we have to continue to repackage it somehow, if it's possible.
Repackage.
the stressor, what's causing the stressor.
What do you mean by repackaging? Say that more.
Look at it differently,
So seeing it differently, perceiving. No, it starts with the perception, right? The perceptions are also tied in with the belief system.
Don't give it the victory. Don't give it the victory. Just don't do it. And I know that's impossible sometimes. I know it's.
Well, the chronic stressors can be both internal and external. If you're fine and suddenly you have a child that gets sick with a prolonged illness, 6 months that you're going to need to be taken care of, it's sometimes stressful to go in, so you have to kind of learn stress coping practices, right? Is that what you're getting at? Like what? Like mindfulness-based stress reduction? Ah, thank you for the plug. Yeah. So you're absolutely right, because the chronic adrenaline will cause all these things on your heart and such. And when it shunts the blood away from here, by the way, irritable bowel syndrome and ulcerative colitis and the constipation diarrhea thing, it used to be said stress was a big thing in ulcers. So you can walk through the cortisol. Elevates your blood sugar. If the blood sugar continues to be elevated, you lead to diabetes. Changing your fat metabolism. You ever see somebody who takes a lot of cortisone? They'll gain weight. They'll be puffy all over. It changes the brain mechanism, so it shuts down the areas of critical thinking and the memory centers, leading to memory dysfunction, leading to mood disturbances, depression. And I think the tunnel vision is very interesting. Chronically suppressing and just sort of changing your tunnel vision sort of gives you that loss of ability to see things that may be available, the opportunity cost, if you will. But a lot of mood disturbances and such. And cortisol and adrenaline, when we're getting ready for fight or flight, they affect the immune system in such a way that it prepares you for injury. So if you're going to get cut or beaten up or that, it sends out the immune, so I don't know if it's T cells or B cells or whatever, but so that if you do get something, it'll protect you from getting an infection. And it also tends to clot the blood for the same reason. If you get cut, you want to clot your blood off so you don't bleed to death. But if you chronically elevate that, it messes up your immune system such that you are more prone to infection. So if you talk to people who are chronically stressed out, so if you go to a doctor and you keep getting these infections, one of the first things they should ask anyway is, are you stressed out? And the immune system sometimes is altered enough. There's some slight evidence that says it leads to cancers. Chronically stressed out people have a higher chance of having cancer, that kind of thing. And of course, chronically elevating the clotting factors will clot your blood inappropriately, heart attacks and strokes. So getting back to the point that's really well taken, this stress in itself is not a bad thing. In fact, sometimes it's needed for survival. Chronic stress